So welcome everybody tonight to Manchester Trades Council's monthly public meeting. And our theme this month is pay, which is an extremely important subject given the awful economic news that we've had today about the high rate of inflation, highest in 10 years. We've had, several months now of bad news about power bills, about national insurance rises. And therefore, pay is a really, really important subject. And we keep getting told that the economy is great and that many professions are having pay rises. Of course, we know that's not true for the public sector. We don't want to concentrate just on the public sector, but it does illustrate the fact that when the government say one thing, there's a lot more to the facts than they make out. We've got three great speakers tonight. We've got Julie Wilkinson, who's the Manchester MMU UCU Branch Secretary. We've got Rena Wood, who is the Assistant Branch Secretary for UNISON Manchester. And we've got Alex Kenny, who amongst other things is the NEU National Executive Member in London. All three have got huge experience of pay negotiations and or are involved at the moment in disputes or negotiations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker tonight. It was a privilege to be on the picket line with her last week, where her and her comrades were picketing their place of work. It wasn't just about pay, and I don't mind, Julie, if you wander into the other areas of why you were on strike as well. But it certainly was about pay in one sense, and about 0-hour contracts, etc. So, Julie Wilkinson, MMU UCU Branch Secretary, you're very welcome, Julie.
Thank you, John, and hello to everybody. Just, John, the privilege was the other way around, really. It was just great to have your support, and I think Annette is here as well, and she was there supporting, and if anybody else is here who was there supporting, I think many of you will have been in dispute, and you will know just how important it is that we get that sort of support from other trades unions and, sympathetic and supportive comrades on the picket lines. It's incredibly important to us. So I just want to thank you, John, and anybody else who was here who managed to come who sent us messages of solidarity. We really, really appreciate it. So I'm Branch Secretary of UCU, the College Lecturers Union at Manchester Met. And of course, Manchester Met's one of the biggest newer universities, right? So we were established as a university, I think, in 1992. I think one of the things that's really important is to understand, very often when people think about university lecturers, they think about a group of people who are privileged and well paid. Okay, it's regarded as a job that, a lot of people want to do. It's hard to get into. It's regarded as having, good pensions, high value, being well paid. And I think that's one of those things which is, it has changed. It's changed fundamentally because of the ways in which student funding has changed. So when the loan system was changed and students had to pay back notional loans, the universities were forced into a much more commercial arrangement with students. And it's changed everything. This has happened over the period of time that I've worked in universities. And one of the things that's happened over that period of time is a massive decrease in the value of university lecturers' pay. One of the reasons why it takes, university lecturers don't often strike over pay, right? I think I've seen it once in 20 years. Apart from recently. And one of the reasons we don't is because as a workforce, people rather feel themselves to be privileged, right? It's enjoyable work when it goes well and when you're treated well. And it was in the past much more enjoyable than it is now. Now it's very highly pressured. And over the period since the funding system has changed, the pay for university lecturers has deteriorated. Since 2009, the value of our pay has dropped by 20% in real terms. you can imagine that that is a really significant drop, right? And it's year on year on year, the value drops. It's taken, I've tried to sort of explain to you that it takes a lot to get university lecturers out on strike. And one of the, so it has to be quite extreme for people to feel that it's necessary to go on strike, right? So people hold back and they hold back and they hold back and they don't want to take strike action. I mean, it's partly because we're, you know, there's a vocational aspect to our work. And people don't want to let students down, a little bit like, you know, I mean, it's not quite as extreme, but, you know, in the medical profession, it's quite, people are very, very reluctant to take strike action. And we're very reluctant to challenge students, to challenge the continuity of the work for the students. Now, of course, at MMU, we're dealing with the new trade union legislation. We call it, obviously, everybody here will understand the anti-trade union, the Tory anti-trade union laws, which require us to ballot and to get over 50% of our membership to engage in a ballot in order to take industrial action. Recently, we were the first branch in the country of UCU and only the second trade union branch in the country to have to take industrial action a few years ago. I think it was now 4 years ago, but that was over jobs. So we won a ballot in our branch to take action to defend jobs, and we took 2 days of strike action, having beaten the ballot threshold. And we did save over 90 jobs, right? It was really important that we did that. But since then, our members have not supported any calls for industrial action in sufficient numbers to get over that ballot threshold. And at the moment, the current action on pay is a national action, and universities voted one by one whether to take action or not. And there was such anger in our institution that we achieved over 60% of the membership voting and engaging in that ballot. Now, that's a really important thing for colleagues and comrades here to be aware of, because the nature of that threshold really changes the way that you campaign, it changes the way you frame a dispute, it changes what you might take dispute about. Right, but actually, when you go on dispute, you really have people behind you. And I think we saw that on our picket lines, so that people were fighting about pay for the first time, or they are, and we're continuing with action short of a strike. Only about half of the universities in the country actually achieved that ballot, but it was very close in most of them. Right, so actually the fact that the whole sector isn't out on strike actually belies the level of support, because nationally, if we had aggregated all the votes, the whole of the sector would have been out on strike, because in an aggregated sense, we had more than 51% of members voting in UCU as a whole across universities on this issue of pay. John kindly mentioned the context of the argument that we're having with the employers. Because it's not just about pay, but it's also about associated things that we are trying. We've been trying for years, and we're really now pushing to get the employers to take into account that it's not just how much you get paid, but how much work you're required to do for the money, right? So that we've seen more and more intensification of workloads to the point where we have significant health problems amongst our workforces, people breaking down through exhaustion, the work being too much to do if you've got any sort of caring responsibilities. So people very often force back onto fractional contracts and not able to, you know, do a full contract and earn the total amount of money. Casualization is endemic and really, really serious. And of course, it's clear that casualization holds down the wages. It's clear that that's been a pattern. As the wages have been depressed, So the numbers of people on casual, precarious contracts who are employed like the dockers used to be, right, you know, queuing up at the beginning of term, what teaching might you get this term? And it's that precarious. And we have people at MMU who've been teaching for the university for up to 15 years on those contracts. And you can't live on the money, really. You have to do other jobs. Some of our staff, and these are people with PhDs, okay? We're not talking, so to do a PhD, you have to study for about 8 years, right? Through universities. It's between 7 and 8 years worth of study after school. Okay, so this is a really big investment in these people, and they're being paid really very, very low rates of pay, often certainly below the living wage if you calculate it over a year, and very often actually below the national minimum wage as well when you average it out. And at MMU, we know, because we've been fighting to get casualised staff onto fractional contracts, we know that we have at least 403 tutors teaching students who have employee status, so they've been teaching at the university for 2 years and more, on 0 hours contracts. Right, zero hours contracts, right? No security of any kind. That's what the university sector is becoming. It's becoming a casualised sector. And so this pay dispute is in the context of asking for decent pay for everybody and challenging those sorts of practices that push the pay down. Right, so it's difficult to include that stuff in collective bargaining over pay, because there isn't really the understanding and the framework for it. It's very, very difficult. And of course, we've got the same sorts of problems of organising precarious workers that any other sector that has to unionise precarious workers is dealing with. And we have learnt lessons from other sorts of battles to get precarious workers into trade unions. We've been learning lessons from that, using some of the same sorts of organising techniques. And we have recruited a great many more, but still not everybody. There are still people whose jobs we're fighting for to be fractionalised at MMU who are still not in the union. Right, so it's a really challenging problem for trades unions, and I think in a way it's at the heart of the issues that are facing us now. John, that's probably enough for the moment, is it?
Julie, you painted a grim picture, but it was an excellent contribution. Thank you very much. I'm hoping you can stick around for the debate or questions at the end. Okay, thank you very much, Julie. So we'll do all the questions and comments at the end. So what we'll do is we'll move on. Let's welcome Rena Wood. I work sometimes with Rena because part of her role is with schools in Manchester, but she does have lots of experience of pay negotiating. She's the Assistant Branch Secretary of UNISON Manchester, and so I'd like to welcome Rena to give us some information.
Thanks very much, John. Yeah, I'm also Joint Deputy Convener of UNISON North West, and we're the biggest region in UNISON. And we're also the biggest public sector trade union, but more than 75% of our membership are low-paid part-time women. And in terms of our national negotiations, I'm also one of the 3 Northwest reps on our NJC. I represent a low-paid member's seat from the Northwest region. So we are slap bang in the middle of our pay campaign at the moment, and we are actually balloting our members. And what I think it's important to say about the NJC, if you think about local services, councils are big employers, but a lot of the services were put out to tender. Some members, luckily, some still retain their NJC terms and conditions. That is slowly being eroded. So in terms of this pay campaign, the outcome of it is really important, because there are a lot of members who work in housing associations and arm's length management organisations who still retain NJC terms and conditions. So it is very, very important for us to have successful industrial action to bring our employers back to the negotiating table. And when you think about what, I mean, what is the basic fundamental of a trade union? What is its role? It's about fighting for pay, what's colloquially called the bread and butter issue. And if we really can't do anything to change the standard of living of our members, where do we go next? So we have a real challenge ahead of us in terms of encouraging members to participate in the ballot, and which is fundamentally more important, because Julie's already referenced the fact the anti-trade union legislation, the threshold we have to reach. We feel there's enough anger because of the pandemic, the NHS, and respect to them, and we organise there as well, you know, the public have a lot of sympathy. But actually, during the same period, local government workers have kept things running as well. When you think your bins being emptied, your street lights working in the winter time, and schools, our members working throughout schools, looking after key workers' children, and they have not got the same credit that they deserve. And that some of our members are working from home, and some of them have been involved in making sure food parcels are delivered to people who are isolated, who've got COVID. So we've carried on working throughout, and in real terms, our pay is diminished. I mean, in effect, we're working 5 days a week, but being paid for 4. That's the reality for people's lives. And what is so disgusting in the 21st century, and one of the, I think the fifth nation in the richest fifth nation in the world, is that our pay is absolutely affordable. We are not greedy. We're not asking for loads of money. What we're asking for is fair. And what we contribute to, it has to be recognised. If you think, and the biggest bugbear for me, and I'm very consistent on this point, is the unfair tax system in the UK. If everybody paid their fair share of taxes from the Amazons, the Starbucks, all these other big multinational companies, then the money, it would be there. And one of the other biggest problems I think we continually face is, since the austerity measures were brought in, the Labour Party, unfortunately, didn't change the narrative. It didn't change the narrative about the global world crisis. So it let the Tories and the Lib Dems get away with accusing Labour for all the problems about the debt. And a lot of people, you know, it's because we don't own the media and we know who controls the media, their narrative is like, oh, well, it's like, you know, running a household budget. Well, and we know it's not. Those of us who are better informed know that's not the case. So it's really difficult 11 years later to try and win the ground on the narrative to say, actually, Labour Party policies before the Lib Dems and the Tories got in were on the right track. They were not responsible for the UK being in a financial crisis. They weren't, but we are living with the legacy of that, the lack of action and narrative from the Labour Party. Even in our own membership, you know, people are worried. They're worried that if they take strike action, what about the jobs? Well, actually, we haven't saved a single job. The austerity measures have made sure that jobs have disappeared over a 10-year period. So it hasn't stopped that happening. So any support that you can give us in terms of your neighbours, your family, your friends, anyone and everyone that you know that works delivering public services, whether from the direct core employer at the local council or in those services that were transferred out, but people still remain on the NJC terms and conditions. It's really important that you, as trade union representatives, those of you who are, to offer the solidarity and respect duly to your members. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And when you see positive outcomes like your strike action, because I know a lot of our UNISON members, and you'll probably know people from UNISON MMU branch, who've, you know, given you solidarity and joined you on the picket lines, that gives people absolute confidence. And the one thing also strikes me as well, when people are fearful and they go, well, will it change anything because it didn't last time? That was a debacle from a very personal point of view. I don't think we should have pulled our second day of action, because that following week, our health members should have come out on the Monday, local government should have come out on the Tuesday, and in that week, the FBU did come out and the PCS, and the media could not have ignored the contribution of workers in public services give. But unfortunately, we had a different leadership at the time. So I believe because we've got a new NEC, I'm hoping we're going in a direction where we will more forcefully stand up for our members in terms of all the pay campaigns that are ongoing at the moment. But I say this, if you think about Philip Green, you got made a serve, you think about all the companies that he owns, registered in his wife's name, so registered in Monaco, they don't pay their fair share of taxes. And a lot of our members, you see them every day when if you're out and about at the time children are going to school, you know, traditionally we call them lollipop men and women. Why should that person pay proportionate of their salary, pay more in taxes than the likes of Philip Green, than the likes of Elon Musk and all the rest of it? It's an absolute utter disgrace. So when people say, even in funding for universities, the money is there if this government had the appropriate level of taxation, a fair taxation system. So all the multinationals who are making millions upon millions of pounds out of, and it's ordinary people that go to the coffee shops and all the rest of it. And it's ordinary people, if you get a decent salary, you put it back into the economy, don't you? Whereas rich people, they stick it in, you know, the Cayman Islands or somewhere. So I think it's important on this issue of pay that we vociferously defend our members. We remind people it's basic. You know, John referred to at the beginning of this meeting about the fact that inflation has gone up. I mean, council tax going up, all the utility bills going up, gas, electricity, water rates. How are people going to be able to feed the kids, clothe them, give them money to go to help them if they're lucky enough to get a university place, if they're lucky enough to pay for their education? So all these things are everyday problems. And in the 21st century, and the 5th richest nation in the world, working people should not have to worry about that. Or we strive for better lives. We strive for a community where people are doing well, because we all benefit, don't we? If people get decent wages, they put it into the economy, they have a better home life, and the whole community, the whole country benefits from that. And it is affordable. And that is the key message, that people should be voting in the industrial action ballots, should be voting for strike action, because we know, we've seen the research is there, the facts are there, it does bring the employer back to the negotiating table. But we can't, this can't happen on its own. We do need the support of all the other trade unions. We know what solidarity is about. We know what being allies is about, because that is the nature of collectivism. That is the nature of trade unions and why they were started, about that collectively helping people to fight and stand together. I'll end on that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Rena. I'm very stirring. Thank you very, very much. It's interesting that both speakers so far have talked about the anti-trade union legislation. Of course, there's no legal right to strike in this country, which if you tell people, they don't believe you. You know, unions are merely indemnified against charges of conspiracy. And that has gone on for over a century, and it's what we've fought against constantly. So the odds are stacked against us, but that's, as you said, Rena, that's what trade unions are here to do. And if we can't do that, what good are we? I'm going to move on to our final speaker, Alex Canny. Before I do, just introduce the idea that the National Education Union face all these same problems. We heard about how it's really difficult to get, you know, university staff out because they've got this vocational aspect to their career, and you know, they worry about their students. The same thing happens in the other education sectors. I say we because I am a member of the National Education Union, are embarking on a new orientation, it's called, but campaign is a good old-fashioned word, of value education and value educators. And the many things we're trying to do is to try and reinvigorate our members and make them realize that they have that power to change things. So I will hopefully hear more of that from Alex. I'll hand over to you, Alex Canny, from the NEU National Executive.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, John, and thank you for inviting me. It's good to be in Manchester. If only virtually, and to be on a platform with the two sisters from two sister unions, Rena and Julie, who've spoken about their disputes, which, as John said, there's a lot in common with what you've been describing there. I just want to start, before I talk about what the NEU is doing, just with some general comments about the situation that I think we're moving into. If you read around what economists are saying and people like the Institute for Fiscal Studies, that there's a new dynamic, a new paradigm opening up. And I was talking to, there's an economist called James Meadway who worked in John McDonnell's office when he was Shadow Chancellor, who's worth looking at on Facebook and other places. And he was describing to me a couple of weeks ago that there's a couple of processes that have dominated industrial relations in a sense over the last 20 years or longer. And he says they're coming to an end. The first is the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, and the opening up of the EU meant that there was a surplus army of labour in Europe that was coming into England and other countries, which enabled employers to keep wages down because there was a surplus of labour. And the other thing that happened around about the same time was the Chinese economy grew. Lots of Chinese peasants moved into cities, and factories were set up, which meant that employers could outsource, some of their work, a lot of their work, to cheaper labour in China. And what James says is both those processes have worked through. They've come to an end, and now is a time where things are opening up. There isn't such a big surplus of labour because of more people retiring than coming into the market, and he says that is creating opportunities, and I think that's where we are at a little bit. We're seeing people, I think, are beginning to see opportunities in the current climate where we can talk about pay and we can talk about conditions of service in a way where we were meeting a brick wall, perhaps previously. We're not sure how long that will last because artificial intelligence may come along and create a new dynamic. But there is a dynamic, I think, where workers are beginning to see that if they're in short supply, they can start making demands on their bosses. And you've already seen that a little bit in the private sector where, recently Unite have won major victories for lorry drivers, 40% pay rises for lorry drivers, I think in one firm, up from £11 an hour to £15 an hour, and just in the last week, Tesco depot worker, workers in Tesco's distribution centres got a pay. They were offered 4%. They threatened to go on strike, and they've been given 5.5%, which they look like they're going to settle for. So we haven't had gains like that on pay for big groups of workers in a long time, and I think that and I think you can see the fact that the UCU members, despite what Julie was saying about it being a vocational, you don't want to harm the students, are saying that they will strike about pay as well as the other issues. So I think there will be more opportunities coming at both the public and the private sector. Trade unions are more dominant in the public sector than the private sector, but I think Unite are doing really good work there to organise workers in those areas. So I'm going to talk about teachers' pay and where we're up to, because as John said, we are trying to reinvigorate members and energize members in schools to try and assert themselves at school level, but also at local level and national level around some of these issues. And just to say a little bit about how our pay is decided. We don't have bargaining rights for teachers on pay. We're one of the groups of workers that's got a review body, an independent review body that is appointed by the government. And the government tells them what they want them to do, and then they go away and take evidence from unions, from other sectors. They look at what's happening in other graduate professions, and they look at what's happening in market forces in teaching. And then they come back and do a report, and the government usually accepts their report because the government's already told them what to do. And since 2010, teachers generally have had below inflation pay rises. And what we're pointing to at the moment, as we go into, we're about to do an indicative survey of members around pay, because we're expecting the government this week are going to say to the review body, what their parameters are for the next year's pay increase. So since 2010, we're saying to our teacher members, your pay has reduced in real terms by 15%. It is 15% lower than what it would be if it had kept pace with inflation. That means, you know, someone, you know, we produce figures all up and down the scale, but for example, someone who in Manchester who's been teaching 6 years is earning around £4,000 less than they would be if their pay had kept pace with inflation. So we think the cumulative effect of that is having a drain on teacher recruitment and retention. And in fact, the review body itself has reported to that. They get told by the government, this is the window you've got to operate in. They usually go along with it. So last year, or this year in September, we get our pay rise. Teachers got 0%. I think we were the only group of workers that got nothing, you know, for all the work we've done in the pandemic. And I should tell you that our members are on their knees as a result of, you know, the work of the last year that they went into, and they gave more and more, you know, to get kids through, working in difficult circumstances, seeing kids suffering, you know, witnessing domestic violence, the digital divide. Teachers went over and above, and then got a 0% pay increase. But what the review body said to the government when it said, okay, we'll give 0% to teachers this year, is you can't do this again, because they have been warning. They look at what's happening in the market and they say there are not enough teachers coming in and there are too many teachers leaving the profession. And if you want to maintain this pay freeze, it will create serious problems in teacher recruitment. And they've been warning about that for a while. So we're pointing to that, and we can see that. We can see that many teachers leave within the first few years of joining the profession because they're burnt out, and it's not the job that they thought it would be. Like, you know, Julie said, UCU members, teaching is a fantastic job. It's creative. It's you know, it gives you an energy. Kids are weird, they're fantastic, they're frightening, but it is, you know, it is a, you know, is a great job that our members like doing, but they are burning out. So what John described is that we are saying we've got to get down to the workplace, because what we have in schools is that the big picture pay is set by the government, the pay scales and the levels at which pay is made. But there are lots of decisions made at school level about how fast you progress, about what extra jobs you take on for not much more money. And so we're encouraging our members to challenge those things in school, as well as pointing up to the government as well. But we, like the UCU, we're linking the issue of pay to workload. Whenever we do surveys or focus groups or whatever you call them amongst teachers, pay doesn't come top of the main. It's there, you know, the cost of living and inability, you know, unable to afford rents or buy somewhere in places like London and the southeast, you know, particularly, but I'm sure it's the same in places like Greater Manchester. But at the top of people's concerns is, I want to be able to get on and do my job without being, you know, you've heard all this before, micromanagement of teachers is rife, you know, with Ofsted. People want to be trusted. They want to be able to make professional judgments. They don't want don't want to be doing things because someone's going to check that they've done them, which is, you know, the data clipboard style of management in too many schools, really, and if, you know, encouraged by government and encouraged by Ofsted. So pay doesn't always feature automatically in members' top concerns, but what we think at the moment, and I think because of the things we're seeing in other parts of the economy, is that pay could become a lightning rod for people's general, you know, ill-at-easeness and disenchantment with what's happening to them in their work, and I think particularly more so when you see the hypocrisy of the government over, you know, we don't want to dwell on it, but the parties when we were all, you know, it's been said often, isn't it? You know, people weren't allowed to visit their parent, you know, relatives when they were dying. They weren't allowed to visit their parents at Christmas, but they were having parties in number 10. And I think all of that is feeding into a little bit of a mood that we should assert ourselves a little bit more on this. So there is a recruitment and retention crisis in teaching. There is a real workload issue in teaching. And on top of that, there's a 0% pay increase, but that drift, or you know, that 15% decline over the last 11 years. So that is leading us into a position where we are going to start in January a major piece of work around pay, because what we're seeing this week, as I say, the government is going to publish what it's going to say to the review body. It's not going to say another pay freeze. It's going to say there has to be an increase for teachers' pay, but it has to be affordable. They have given some indications of raising the salaries of the people who start teaching to 30,000 within the next 2 years. Now, that doesn't mean that requires an 8% increase over each of the next 2 years to get starting salary levels up to 30%. They may well do that. That doesn't mean that everyone else will get 8%. What it means is they'll flatten out the stages by which people go up the pay scale. But it would be a start, and we would look at how we respond to that. But we don't know that they're going to say that. But so we are starting in January a survey. When we know what the government is saying, we're going to do an indicative survey of members about opposing what the government is saying and asking them whether they'd be willing to take strike action. Now we've got 450,000 members across England and Wales. There's separate issues for Wales, so it wouldn't include the Welsh section at the moment, but about 400,000 members in schools in England. So that's quite a big undertaking. So we're organising, you know, national Zoom calls for reps, and then local meetings for reps and members. Just to say that for teachers, we have to meet 2 thresholds. Don't ask why we're considered key workers and other people aren't, but we're in the group of workers that are considered key workers, and therefore we have to meet 2 thresholds when we ballot. We have to meet the 50% threshold, which is challenging enough in itself. But we also have to meet a threshold which says that 40% of those members who are balloted have to vote in favour of action. So that means if you do achieve the 50%, you have to get an 80% yes vote. I think if you get a 50% turnout, you probably are going to get an 80% yes vote, because you've reached a critical mass. But we have to meet both those thresholds. So we're doing a lot of work on, as John said, to engage members, to get reps talking about what's happening in their school, to see what changes they can make at school, and hoping that will then lead them into looking at the bigger national pictures and be ready to vote for action on pay, which, you know, we would hope would be presented alongside what UNISON are doing, UCU and others are doing, as part of a general mood of resistance. I think as we come out of years of austerity, well, are we coming out of years of austerity? I won't finish that sentence probably. So that's a little bit about what we're doing. As I say, just to go back to where I started, I think there are opportunities, and you can see a little bit of a mood developing now. Whether we can make that translate into action because of the thresholds we're facing, it may be perhaps another year before we're able to do that. But I think the mood is there. I think the mood is developing, as we've heard from the other speakers. Just, you know, people have suffered enough through the last 10 or 11 years. And I think, you know, having gone the extra mile and just put in loads of voluntary work, in a sense, what people have done over the pandemic, I think people think that, you know, you've clapped us a bit. Now the time is to put, you know, for the government to put its money where its mouth is and pay where it is in charge of the purse strings for public sector workers, pay public sector workers more. But I think then we have to unite with the private sector and try and close down that divide in people's heads between private sector and public sector, and support our Unite colleagues where they're campaigning for lorry drivers and shop workers and so on, because it's the working class that can turn things around in this country. So I'll finish there, John, I think.
Thank you very much, Alex. And listening to that, it struck me that I was at a pay briefing earlier on for the NEU, totally separate to this, and we were discussing that there's two actual factors in the pay. There's the cost of living rise, which you have correctly said was frozen at 0%, because ourselves and other professions have performance-related pay to allow members to move through the pay scales. And maybe it will come out in the discussion afterwards, but performance-related pay is a pernicious thing, which rather than rewarding good workers, is clearly meant to keep people's pay down and make the majority not get pay progression. So maybe that will come out as we have a discussion now.
I'll say, John, on PRP, I think you're right. And it's interesting that lots of the private sector dropped PRP quite a few years ago because they said it wasn't working. It didn't motivate staff. You know, the public sector always brings these things after the private sector, and then the private sector drops them. So maybe we'll drop it soon. But you're right. You know, it's a pernicious thing in teaching anyway.
I think wasn't there a survey done that it in the English-speaking world, so Australia, North America, etc., it had never been proven to work.
No.
And the only evidence when it was imposed upon education in this country, I think it had come from India, maybe, which, as everybody pointed out, was a completely different dynamic, different way of doing business, and you know, you couldn't really compare the two. So yeah, so there's more than one way to try and suppress people's wages. So I've got a hand up there, and it is Chris Jones.
I remember the days of heady inflation in the late 70s when I first worked, when we were having inflation rates in the 20-odd% and things like that. And, you know, you were fighting for enormous percentage pay rises every year to stand still. And where I worked, which was Littlewood's mail order at the time, we actually won at one stage a sliding scale of wages. And the management having to put the wages up every month, which made everybody incredibly happy. But it sort of missed the 10% they'd lost in their earning power before it kicked in. I think we've reached the point, because inflation's going up again, that we've just got to start talking really big figures and building bodies of opinion across the trade union movement in the wider public, just based on, you know, we've lost so much, this is ridiculous, we're carrying on to lose it. All these little bits of 1% and 1.5% have become meaningless now that inflation is running rip. You know, there was a time very recently when a couple of percent was almost a pay rise, you know, which was, you know, is no good now. And I think what we're struggling with is it's slightly the legacy of minimum wage or real living wage or whatever different names have been thrown around. That, I mean, there was a discussion going on last week around care workers, activists who were campaigning on behalf of care workers and care workers who were campaigning between the demand for £15 an hour, which the Care and Support Workers organisation is pushing, and local activists in East Anglia who were saying, oh, we're just fighting for the living wage, we're in such a weak position. And there was a really interesting debate between defensive, desperately trying to keep up with that sort of living wage minimum, and a very aggressive, we've really got to go for big pay rises to make the difference in all this. And I think we are now at that point. You know, if we're going to start faffing around with 4% here, 2% there, or whatever it is, people are just going to, you know, feel like it's not worth the effort. Whereas if there is a national concept, I mean, I know there's all sorts of problems getting to that point of just making people aware of just how much has been lost since the crash in 2007, 2008, and how much is needed to put that right, and just winning that opinion that, you know, not only do we need it, but we're going to go for it and mean that we're going to go for it. You know, I think that's the psychological thing that we've got to get over. We've been too reticent, too defensive for too long, and we need big goals now, and we really need to go for them. end.
Thanks, Chris. And maybe that's as a result of 30 years now of governments that have just tried to batter the trade union movement. We need to come out of our shell. Rena.
Yeah, thanks, John. First of all, I want to say teachers are amazing. You know, I think everybody who's participating in this event tonight, including teachers, will remember at least one teacher who made them believe in themselves and gave them confidence to think they could do anything that they want. So I just think, yeah, respect to teachers.
Staff, Rena. And support staff.
Yeah, I was just going to come on to say that. Of course, we contribute to that, but it makes a fundamental difference to a young child's life. When you think of the kids that are coming from homes, you know, inner city deprived areas, perhaps the parents don't have the parenting skills, they're coming from homes where nobody's in employment. So teachers make that fundamental difference to kids and to teenagers, young adults. So respect to them. I think one of the big problems I think we have, just in my own union, UNISON, when you think of different service groups we've got, we represent members who work for transport, electricity, gas, we've got members in higher education, is actually the timing of our pay claims. If we could unify that so that we could stick in the pay claims at the same time, I think that would give us a lot more confidence in having united action across the board. And the other thing I've noticed is people don't understand what collective bargaining is. What does it mean? And recruitment is a real issue, and it really makes me angry when I think of someone who's worked for 20 years for the council and they go, no, I'm still not joining. So I have been known to have a conversation where I've referred to them as parasites because they've benefited from what the trade unions have won, from the 35-hour working week if you work for the council, to the sick pay entitlement. That my daughter works in the private sector, works in retail. She's a nurse door member and her employer pays 2 weeks sick pay for the whole year. I'm lucky, I work for Manchester City Council, and if you've got the required length of service and if you're sick, 6 months you're on full pay, 6 months on half pay. And they didn't give us that because they were benevolent, did they? They did that because of collectivism, collective bargaining. So I think we need to be having those conversations as well. It's about giving members the confidence and saying to them, just because you work in a particular sector, but there's people, I think a good point was made, John, about the private sector. I mean, the fact, and we should be talking these things up, shouldn't we? The lorry drivers, in terms of the increase they've got. So it's about the stories where we've benefited, where we've had victories. We need to be sharing that more and more. In UNISON, it was down to Salford branch. They organised the care workers. They've got some of the contracts have come back in-house, but it's a national care company, and they've got a £90 million payback across the UK because they've campaigned for it, because they've organised. And I think that is a key issue. Instead of being a servicing model, the trade unions, you know, there for you when you're in trouble, when you're facing a disciplinary or conduct issue. We have to change the culture of how people view us as a movement. We're not just there to protect you if you're facing accusations from your employer about your capability or your conduct. It's about that, you know, we represent everybody and we organise together, and our strength is in our numbers, and we need to get that message out, don't we, in terms of trying to recruit everybody. Because if you think of all the services that have gone from the public sector into the private sector and the community and voluntary sector, a lot of those private companies, they've got no recognition agreements. You just lose all that in the 2P transfers. Some of those companies are not prepared to honour collective agreements, are they? So I think we need to have more narrative in our movement about what collectivism is, what collective bargaining is, and the fact that different trade unions in different sectors, people delivering different types of services, can all come together. So I think we need to be, you know, having that information out there so that we can give the people across all services, across all areas of work, whether they work in the private sector or the public sector. I think that's what builds the confidence. Thanks, John.
Well said, Rena. Thank you very much. I'll move on to Karen.
Hi. So I'm a UNISON member as well. So I was disappointed that NHS staff didn't vote to strike or to take action against pay. but it was encouraging that the amount of the people that did actually vote in indicative ballots, it was actually a high number of people did vote for strike action or whatever. So that's really was good in that way. But what I did want to say is that what I've been out on a lot of solidarity actions, you know, for any unions, and I'm part of, as well as on the Trades Council, which I think is a great unifying thing, and People's Assembly, I'm involved in that as well. So that united action where we give solidarity, I think is really important. And one of the things that I've noticed is there's actually quite a lot of young people or workers that have never been involved in industrial actions before. And I think and we're seeing that quite a lot more. It's really getting people out there. It's getting people interested in what's happening. It's getting them interested in collectivization and how they can make a difference and how we can actually win these battles. And I think it's really particularly important for young people, because with my union, we actually go, when new people start, we're involved in the recruitment process as our union branch. And when we get young people, they just don't know about unions. And it's my bugbear. I just think there's so many young people don't know, you know, about unions. But what was really good about the recent strike, you know, for university lecturers and things, is all the students that were coming out in solidarity, you know, was really encouraging and inspiring, in that they were actually seeing the power of unions. And I think that's really important, because another part of, because my day job is actually as a therapist, and I get quite a lot of young people or just people generally who again are really struggling because of jobs. The actual mental health problems is the job. It's not, you know, that's the main issue. And you know, I always remember one young person I had, and he came and he was just saying, God, I've just had a temporary job, and it was actually at a university, and it was in an admin department. You know, it's really nice. He goes, no one bothers me when I go to the toilet, you know, and I got a lunch break, and people were, you know, it just meant people were kind and decent to him. And then says, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. And he didn't know that was possible, that jobs were like that. And you know, so I know things are not great in universities, but that bit was actually quite good. But I think there's a lot of people out there that think jobs, this is the way it is. And so I think that all this strike action that people are talking about today, you know, it's wonderful. And I think we need to do more of that and come out in solidarity with all the strikes, regardless of our union branch or whatever, you know. So yes, that's all I wanted to say, really.
Thanks, Karen. You're absolutely right, of course, about young people. That's why we need to support strikes such as the Deliveroo strike, which was mainly young people who maybe had never been unionised before. So there is hope out there, I think, is what I'm trying to say. So I'll move on to Julie.
Thank you, John. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points about this business. I really recognise a lot of what people were saying, what Karen was just saying about students coming out in solidarity. It might be useful for people to know that students at Manchester University have been quite radical for quite a long time, right, and have supported UCU members at Manchester University in previous disputes. Actually, for as long as I can remember, they've been pretty radical. But more and more so during the pensions dispute at University of Manchester, which didn't really affect us because we're on a different pension scheme. But this time, but MMU students have been much less politically aware, much less energized as a total group. There are people involved, right, in political movements amongst the students at MMU, but as a student union and as a student body, much more passive, much less engaged in the trade union and labour movement or in politics of any kind, right? This time has been different. And I'm really glad that Karen brought that up, because it's really important and interesting. We saw students on our picket lines who were our students, our MMU students, right? And that's really important, because if you think about the groups of people from whom we recruit, the universities recruit from slightly different groups of young people. Our students tend to be more local and to have slightly like, you know, they don't have A-level grades necessarily at the same level as you need to get into Manchester University. They tend to be, the majority of them are still the first people in their families going to university. right? So there is a really interesting, our student body is so interesting, right? Because very often, if you're seeing a political sea change, you'll see it amongst those young people. And I think we're seeing that now in a way that I've not seen for 20 years. So that's really exciting and hopeful. So I agree with everything that people were saying. Rena said it as well about, you know, lack of understanding and knowledge of the trade union movement, of the labour movement, people not really understanding what politics are, not knowing how to get their teeth into it, not really understanding the thing about organising. And that is a really important feature that we're going to need to be taking into account as trade unionists all the time while we're doing what we're doing. But I also wanted to say something else. I think there are some really important differences from the 70s, because, you know, there are cul-de-sacs we could go down, right, aren't there? With pay bargaining, celebrating the idea that, you know, what we can't lose is all that we've gained in terms of our understanding of the importance of equalities. Right, we cannot let that go. We have that, I think, now in our DNA, and we can't let that go to the idea that, okay, it's time to be starting to muscle in on which group of workers can shove other people out the way, as it were. I mean, I know people don't do that, but, you know, that idea of, and it's so difficult, because Rena said, you know, the idea of timing of your pay claims. You know, and it would have been great if UNISON and UCU could have got together. And we know that that's illegal, right? And it's illegal because it's effective. So we understand that. But I do think this business of, I think it's going to look different, and it needs to look different when we're campaigning from what it looked like in the 70s, when I was also around. Okay, and it needs to look different. And partly it's because we are dealing with casualised workers. John, you're right to mention Deliveroo. Right, we're dealing with that, with an economy that is really very differently organised, and we have to respond to that. But we also, our pay dispute is also about pay inequality. That I don't know to what extent that's an issue, and I'm sure it is an issue, but I don't know to what extent it's an issue in the rhetoric around the discussion, the narrative in the National Education Union. But for us in UCU, you know, I'm afraid if you are Black and you are teaching in a university, you are paid less, right? If you are, there are fewer people, you know, from minority ethnic groups who are teaching in universities anyway, and they are paid less. If you are disabled and working in university, you are on average paid less. If you are a woman and teaching in university, you are still paid less, right? These issues, our members are not going to let that stuff go, right? So that it needs to be right there, right deep in the process. I think one of the keys to this is looking at pay differentials, looking at limiting the gaps between who gets paid at the top level, who gets paid at the lowest level, right? And its average pay differentials, I think, is going to be crucial to keeping hold of equality in our pay bargaining. I've finished.
Very much. Thank you very much, Julie.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hi, thank you. I'm a good friend of Eddie Garner's. We both worked in the magistrates' court, so I'm still there. Eddie is lucky. He may not believe it. He's lucky. He managed to retire, and I'm still slogging away, trying to make sure I pay your pension there, Eddie. What I've made a few little chip-in points at the edges here, guys, because firstly, you know, unfortunately, we all agree that we want to attract in younger people at the bottom end, in a sense. And when I say the bottom end, I mean trying to bring in the new generation of the workforce. But that we need a few more of them at these sort of gatherings. So we've got to think about how we do that. And I just asked one question in that sense. It is climate emergency, and one of the ways to start getting to them, because they do seem to care about that. I'm not saying we don't. I think we do. But there's a good chunk of the population who don't care about climate emergency. So young people do. Young people seem to care about Black Lives Matter. Young people seem to care about you know, issues of, well, or take in their stride issues of racism, lesbian, gay, everything like that. They seem to take a lot of that more easily as a new generation, perhaps, and therefore that might give us some, some principled ground to put arguments that they get and understand. But therefore, I've moved on to the point about union history, and we've got to look backwards and forwards. And therefore, the forward-looking bit is the education, because there is a loss of education. A lot of us have probably been to so many colleges or weekend training courses or union conferences where we all had the opportunity to gather, listen, learn, realise the wider aspects of what we were doing as a movement. That is not available. That just is not available to the next generation. And I speak as a union learning rep who has shriveled in what I can do as a union learning rep. I began as a union learning rep with Eddie in around about 2000. And by 2010, we were still going strong. But in the last decade, the Tories have killed that. And I now just about exist in my job as a legal advisor. And I am struggling. I do not have the time. So I'm the chair of the branch. I'll have an AGM in January for PCS, North Wales. And I will not be able to do a great deal else. I argue with the managers. I go to the formal management meetings, but I cannot go round the staff. I work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 9 to 5 or 9 to 7, for God's sake. And I literally do my job because I don't have the time to do anything else. Therefore, we have to think about the way in which we attract the new generation in. Education is something that is now a bit of a chasm. And I also say that I speak as a cooperator, and you're in Manchester, and Manchester is often the heart of cooperation. I just feel that not uniting totally, but the bringing together, the understanding and the working with the cooperative movement and the trade union movement, 6 million cooperators maybe, 7 million trade unionists. That will not add up to 13 because I'm in both camps. Some of us are in both camps, but it might add up to 9 million, and it might strengthen what we're saying to people. So I think there's a few little points out there, and I think COP26 is going to happen next year as COP27. And so there are opportunities, but it's going to be a tough old game if we don't change what we do. I think we've got to change what we do. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I'll now move on back to Alex.
Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for that contribution, Chris. I think it's, well, certainly for us in the NEU, 40% of our members are under the age of 35. So in getting them to engage, that's a generation that people thought weren't interested in unions. They are in unions because teaching is a very highly unionized profession, partly because you're working with kids and they're a bit mad sometimes. But so, finding what, we want to make things like climate change and Black Lives Matter a trade union issue because they should be trade union issues, but also because that's where we want to bring them into being involved in those issues through the trade union as much as other issues. So that is important. Just to pick up on, the general discussion, I think it's important. I think that the question of solidarity that Karen raised is really important, because we have to recognise that we've been in a period of historically low levels of industrial struggle over the last 10 or 20 years, in a sense, since the defeat of the miners in 1985, and then the print workers. We haven't seen mass industrial action, and that, I think means levels of confidence are low. And it is a question, I think, every victory that one group of workers had, we have to bring into other unions to make to build confidence. And I think that's reflected in what you see in some of the indicative ballot results that are happening. The RCN, I think, had a 20% turnout in their indicative ballot, but an 80% rejection of the pay offer. So that is a huge rejection of what they're being offered, but not the confidence to go forward with anything. And Kevin Courtney was telling me today at a TUC executive committee, some of the unions that you might think are more conservative in their outlook, people saying there is a mood developing. It's not translating into mass activity yet, but there is a mood developing, and I think our job, you know, is to push that mood as far as we can, you know, stretch it to its limits by offering the solidarity, by making sure that people know what's happening. And, you know, for us in the NEU, as I've said, that means facing down to schools to try and build confidence that as a group of workers in one workplace, you can assert yourself. And we did, I think this points to what Rena and Julie were saying. We did lots of work in the pandemic. We increased our membership by 40,000 and increased the number of reps we had, because people could see that decisions in schools were being made that affected them, and they wanted to be involved in them. You know, we nicked the mantra from the disability movement, nothing about us without us, you know, and we were saying, if you're doing these risk assessments, if you're going to make decisions about who goes where and what and how these things happen, we're going to be involved in them. And we are consciously taking that attitude and encouraging members to take that attitude into some of the other workplace issues that affect them, you know, and we're saying we're not going back to being ignored. We're going to be, and some heads didn't like it. They didn't like reps knocking on the door saying, can I see the risk assessment? Or can we have a chat about this? Can we have a chat about that? Because they're used to managing their school in the way they want. So it's slow burn in a way. The other thing I just wanted to say, now this will apply more easily in some places than others, but if you listen, you know, I'm a bit of a saddo. I wake up and listen to the money programs on Radio 4 and Radio 5. But if you listen to people from the finance sector speaking about how they're responding after COVID, there are very, very few companies in the city that are going back to 5-day working in an office. You know, they are offering people, you know, because they see that workers, you know, I think it's a response to people asserting themselves a little bit more. They, you know, there's lots of graduate, you know, people, companies that recruit graduates in the finance sector saying, come and work for us, and you only have to be in the office 3 days a week. You can work at home 2 days a week. And you can't translate that into loads of the public sector, but there may be little ways in which you can do it. If you've, for teachers, if you've got time off where you're not teaching, you're planning your lessons or you're doing marking, see if your head will let you do that at home. You know, working at home means you can put the laundry on and do other stuff and then get on with the job that you've still got to do the work. So it's interesting that in the private sector, they are looking at flexible working as a way to recruit people into their jobs, as presumably as a way of saving money on electricity and lighting as well. I don't know, but it's clear that they're conscious that they have to offer a little bit more in order to get the people they need. And I think that will apply in sections of the public sector as well. And where that is happening, where we think it might happen, we have to make them union demands so that we win them then, rather than just wait for someone to say that they'll offer them. So you know, the solidarity I think is important, and the building of confidence. We should all take confidence from what the lorry drivers are doing, what the Deliveroo workers did, you know, to get more money from Tesco workers. It may seem a remove from the day job that teachers and lecturers and public sector workers are doing, but it's building the confidence of our side that is going to be key in the next period, I think.
Thank you, Alex. Back to Ed now.
Yeah, just a few quick points to focus on. Yeah, you know, when we spoke about performance-related pay and performance management and all these systems that really have been shown to be totally draconian, out of date, and the good companies have abandoned them, but, you know, the public sector seems to keep on with these. So, yeah, there was a fantastic programme recently that John Trickett's and the from Labour and the film about it, about the wealth, and very simply he's explaining that, you know, the wealth is just being sucked up to the few, and, you know, at the bottom, you know, as we know, starving, whatever. But how many yachts do you need? How many houses do you need? We got to really get the public on board with all this, and that's the whole thing: solidarity, get the public on board. But moving to, yeah, Chris Hall said fantastic things there about union learning rep. It was such a fantastic initiative that. Also, I keep pressing for Mary Sayers uniting schools, you know, getting in the schools, all this learning, education about people's rights and the history. Recently, I did the trade union and TUC and Ruskin College diploma in trade union history. Fantastic, you know, people get totally missed this. You know, it's you know, we are many, ye are many, they are few, and all that. So solidarity, yeah, we need to get the public all together on, but not talk about some Mickey Mouse 2% pay rise and all this that's just going nowhere. We've really got to turn things totally up on its head. Yep, leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Ed. Rena.
Yeah, just on a point in terms of giving people confidence and people who work in education and joining trade unions, I think the fact that jointly the trade unions all work together in terms of lobbying government, in terms of issuing advice to people who work in schools. So I think that was really constructive. And I think all the trade unions who organise in education saw the benefits of that, because I know as UNISON activists, printing off the information or emailing it to school contacts or school stewards, they could see the logos of all the different trade unions who've been part of this collective of lobbying the government to produce useful advice and information to staff who work in schools. So I think that's quite crucial. Being seen to work together instills confidence in people. And yet, I mean, the future is about young people, isn't it? Because some of us, we're reaching that age of retirement. I think that's amazing, though. 40% of the NEU membership is young people. I think that's amazing, because I think our average age in UNISON is still bloody old, quite frankly. It's not a good thing, you know. So, and the climate change, that is what young people just on the ball with those issues. So all the trade unions need to have policies on that. And I'm really glad UNISON, I got a copy of it. I went as part of UNISON delegation to North West Labour Party, and it was on our stall. So I'm really pleased that we're doing something about that. So all the trade unions could do that. And maybe when the trades councils put on future events like this, because I suspect, I don't know, but they have, in terms of their equalities agenda, the North West TUC, they have regional forums for well, they call it BAME, we call it Black and UNISON, different political perspective, but they've got Women's Committee, Disabled Members Committee, and I'm sure they've got young members. Perhaps going forward, any events that the Trades Council organises could contact North West TUC and see if a young member wants to come and participate and have a discussion on whatever the subject issue is, you know, to make that link through people who identified as trade union activists and bothered to participate at a regional level within the TUC. That might be something going forward, always making the links with the various committees of the North West TUC. I think that's an inroad for you, for making the contact with young people and doing exchanges. I don't know what people think, but I think that's something to think about for the future.
Thank you very much, Rena. I'd just like to point out for the record that Alex and I are not part of the young NEU section.
Well, I won't be so rude to say.
I don't have any other hands up, so comrades. Oh yes, I do. Chris Hall.
Sorry, thank you. One thing I did forget to say, and it totally infuriates me, so therefore I feel it's better that I share it with you and share the pain. So I feel that what we are obviously having is a subsidised capitalist economy, i.e. we subsidise Tesco's and all those others to pay low wages so that people then have to get top-ups, all the various top-ups, so they can carry on working on the, and we'll call it the worst part, the gig economy. Now, there is meant to be some benefits in the gig economy, and you can always get someone who says, oh, it suits me, so I can work on a Friday evening for 4 hours, and I can still be a student or something like that. But the problem is that for too many people now need 3 jobs still not to be able to afford to live. 3 jobs, 4 jobs, and I still can't afford to live. Completely wrong. So it could be that we also need to put out an absolute set of minimum demands. Really, if you look at towards, and I'm not really sure of the details, but is it towards either Sweden or Norway or Finland? I'm not sure where, but the Nordic countries, I suspect, they're going into a little bit more of what you can say generalized provision, so that not everybody gets guaranteed a house and a job and all these things, but they are guaranteeing more and more things. And therefore your wage isn't quite as important if you've got the absolute basics. And I think we should make the demand for the absolute basics for everybody. And then we can say, well, we're not excluding everyone. And then people who haven't got much can say, well, yeah, if I join that gang who says the basics for everybody, even I will get something. So I think we should reconstitute the nature of the demands we make as a good calling cry to get more people on board. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. I'd really like to thank our three speakers tonight, Julie, Rena and Alex. I think it's been a really good debate. And I'd just like to point out that the next Manchester Trades Council public meeting will be our AGM, which is on Wednesday, the 19th of January. There will be guest speakers at that. They will be announced shortly, and the information to join is on all the usual media. So once again, thank you very much for everybody who's turned up, and we will be putting this out on our social media as well, so you will be able to watch it again. Thank you very much.
Can I just make a last plea call for anyone that you know that's employed on NJC terms? Ask them to please return their ballot paper. Thank you.
Okay, Rena, excellent point. Okay, thank you very much, comrades. Good night. And thank you,
everyone. Thank you.